Hi everyone, it's Tom again. Just some more tips about revising your draft for paper one and things that you should do before you submit your final draft. Today I just want to talk a little bit about the introduction as a whole and also using evidence in the body of your paper. So what I want to start with is looking at the checklist we looked over for thesis statements last time. The first thing I want to point out are the resources on Blackboard that are available to you as you make revisions to your final draft that are due this Sunday. So if you'll remember, when you look at the assignment sheet in week 2, there was also this folder entitled Paper 1 Stuff. If you don't want to go back to the week 2 lessons, you can also find it under course resources. But this is a folder that just has several things that hopefully you've gone over or read that explain some important information about how you might go about revising your final paper. One thing specifically I think you absolutely should look at before you turn in your final draft is this checklist, which is called Paper 1 Opening and Thesis. And as I said, it's really just a checklist for particular aspects of the paper that you need, right? So there's a kind of how-to chart, if you haven't already seen it, about what to do in the introduction. For example, it says you should quote specific passage from the text that you're dealing with, explain the passage, then transition to the thesis, and again, just underscore the format of the thesis statement that I want a specific experience, the specific thing that happened to you is what I mean by this case. The active verb has taught, has demonstrated to me, something like that. And then finally, the specific predicate, which in this case should be the specific lesson, so that your thesis statement that you work toward at the end of the introductory paragraph should follow this format, which is in that checklist that I pointed out to you, okay? And again, the checklist, I've already shown you these, but the checklist has sort of templates or demonstrations, examples of what these kinds of thesis statements should look like, so that we have specific experience, a verb, active verb here, and then the specific thing that you are taught by this experience, right? And your thesis absolutely needs to underscore these ideas, and it needs to come at the very end of your opening paragraph so that once you move, your reader moves to the narrative of the story of your paper, they have an idea of what the argument is that you are trying to prove. Because that's going to be very important, because the body of the paper needs to not just tell a story, but work to prove that lesson. So the reader needs to be conscious of what it is you're trying to do with the body of your paper. And I want to give a kind of practical demonstration of what this might look like. One of the other things that's up on the page here in the Paper 1 stuff is this student sample essay for Paper 1. And if you haven't read it, it's about fly fishing in February. And it's based off of an essay by Henry David Thoreau. But the important thing here is that what I want you to look at is the sort of the way this introduction works. So we just read real quickly. Henry David Thoreau's essay, Where I Lived and What I Lived For, addresses many issues concerning life and how it should be lived. One issue he wrote about in particular deals with the way people attempt to simplify their lives. Thoreau believed that you should let your affairs be as 2 or 3 and not 100 or 1,000. So he specifically quotes, he doesn't just summarize the text, but he specifically quotes it. He also takes a few minutes to put the essay or the quote from the essay into context. In other words, he doesn't just throw it out there without some kind of introduction or context for the reader. He lets us know who the author is, and I should underscore how this is very important. The first time in your essay you refer to an author, you use their full name. After that, you use just the last name. So the first time here would be Henry David Thoreau, and then after that, just Thoreau. And then he quotes the passage specifically, let your affairs be 2 or 3, not 100 or 1,000. Importantly, after that, he explains what this quote means, or he explains to the reader what specifically this means so that he can play off of this lesson. In other words, Thoreau suggests that we should simplify our life only by undertaking tasks we perceive to be achievable. And then he sort of makes a turn. While this may appear sound logic, Thoreau's claim fails to address the burning human desire inside every human to reach his full potential. That yearning for self-improvement creates motivation required to engage in the impossible. Through my experiences, I have found that in order to grow and progress as an individual, you have to act on that desire. Without new experiences and stimuli, people become bored and frustrated. Being an avid angler, I frequently find myself thinking of new ways to improve and develop my ability to catch fish. Exploring the boundaries of my capabilities and expanding my horizons in regard to fishing has allowed me to reach my full potential through a process of realization. Now, I'm highlighting this portion of the opening paragraph here because this is his thesis. And in a lot of ways, I think it works pretty well. For example, that specific experience, exploring the boundaries of my capabilities and expanding my horizons in regard to fishing, and then the active verb, has allowed me to reach my full potential through a process of self-realization. I think the weakest part of this thesis in this student paper is this: what does it mean to reach your full potential or self-realize yourself? I think that's a little vague, but it's enough to go by, right? And the whole structure of the introduction works this way. He puts the author and the article in context in the first sentence or two, then he quotes the piece and he explains what that quote means. And then from doing that, it's just sort of a process of logical transition and to the point he gets to the thesis at the end of the opening paragraph. Finally, toward the end of the introduction. So that really should be the process of what your introduction is trying to do. So when I go over those list of things in the checklist, that's what I'm talking about. That is the idea of what I want you to think about when you work on your introduction. So you are basically starting the introduction paragraph by explaining your author, who they are, or what their essay is about. Quoting that author specifically, explaining the meaning of that quote. After that, you move in a sort of transitional way till you get at the end of the paragraph to your specific argument or thesis that you're trying to write. One thing I typically say here too is when you think back to that activity you guys did on transitional words or phrases, how to set up a sort of sense of logic or continuity in your paragraphs. Those kinds of phrases are really important in an opening paragraph because the opening paragraph is something where you really want to bring your reader with you. So you'll see things like in other words. While this may appear sound logic, again, that's sort of reference to the prior sentence. It continues the reader on to the next sentence. So that's one thing you might also try and do in your opening paragraph is to use a number of these logical or these transitional phrases that sort of help establish flow and continuity from one sentence to another. Okay, so that's it with regards to your introductory paragraph.